Good afternoon, everyone. June Rawl here, the director for IISP. I'm so happy that all of you could join us today for IISP's webinar Wednesday. Today's webinar, the Individualized Instructional Student Plans, as we refer to as the IISPs, for the TABE 11 and 12 mathematics test. We're so happy that you're able to join this discussion today on ways that we can improve your adult education program through using these IISPs. Today, Maria Gutierrez, our administrator from Miami-Dade County Public Schools, is going to take us through a deep dive on the IISPs for math. I know that many of you have been using the IISPs for reading and language, and I know that you've seen improvement on mastery on target content areas based on your students' needs. So I know that when you see the IISPs for math, you're going to be able to use them and access them for mastery for your students. So a few little housekeeping things to remember before we get started. I know that a lot of you already know that you are in listen-only mode, and you can interact with us via the Q&A option. So go ahead and put your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A option. Maria and I will be looking at them throughout the webinar today. I will tell you that all of the documents that are presented today are already loaded on the IISP website. So you have them already there that you can access. The recording will be available 48 hours after the presentation. So it's all archived. Everything is there for you to later look at, review, or pass on to one of your colleagues. So at this point, I know, Maria, you've got a lot to talk about. So I welcome everyone and welcome you, Maria, and thank you so much for facilitating our conversation today.
Thank you, June. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited about being here today. We are finally at the third IISP in the series, the last one, the IISP for math. I'm really excited to share this with you, but let's first take a very brief moment to look over the training objectives for this webinar session. In this session, we will unveil this IISP, which is an intervention tool that has been designed to improve your students' TABE 11-12 math post-test scores. So the very long-awaited tool, the Individualized Instructional Student Plan, which we will refer to as the IISP from here on, for math, will help you customize instruction to the needs of the student, as well as provide the student with a tool to help him or her monitor progress based on mastery of content and skills. So a separate IISP has been developed for each of the TABE 11-12 math level tests. Now, this training is similar to the ones we did for the language IISPs and the reading IISPs. And like those other two webinar trainings, it's broken down into three simple parts. First, we will take a brief look at differentiating, individualizing, and personalizing instruction. It is important that we understand the differences in these types of instructions so that we can, towards the end of this training, explore how we can personalize these IISPs to become more learner-centered. Second, we will take an in-depth look at the new TABE 11-12 Math IISP to see how it was created and what content is included in each level. I will walk you through the process of selecting the appropriate plan and then transferring students' pretest data to the plan in order to make it more individualized for each student. Third, I will leave you with some concluding words and a brief reflection, which will hopefully lead you to a call to action. All right, so let's get started and we will begin with step number 1. All right, so at IISP, you know that we always, without fail, develop learning tools and resources based on research and best practices. The development of the TABE 11-12 IISPs is no exception to this. So we will begin by taking just a little peek into the basics of how you can use these IISPs to differentiate, to individualize, and to personalize your instruction. Now, we've addressed the training objectives for this PD, so let's begin by addressing the direction that we want to take as we incorporate these new IISPs into our ABE curriculum. Now, if you joined us earlier this year for the live trainings on the IISPs for language and for reading, you know that I began each training by addressing 3 education buzzwords. And I did this because I wanted you to see how you could use these IISPs to address multiple types of instruction, regardless of your preference or which side of the research you choose to support. I will briefly review these again today for those of you who have not yet viewed these earlier webinars, just so that we can say we're all on the same page. And by the way, the full recording, like June said, of the live training, not only of this live training, but the previous ones are all available on the IPDAY website, along with fillable PDF versions of all of the IISPs. So bottom line is that learning is a great motivator. If your students can actually see what they've mastered, right? Perhaps a particular standard or competency, and if they can see that they've acquired a new skill. All 3 of these instruction types lend themselves to reaching this goal. And the new IISPs can be used to target non-mastered math content so that minimal time is wasted and students can build on, the sense of achievement. We begin with differentiated instruction. Now, differentiated instruction lends itself to small group settings. Usually, the teacher will identify non-mastered content and skills and will group students based on common deficiencies. The lessons are designed around the needs of each group, so it's important to select or develop activities that specifically address non-mastered content within the group. Now, these groups are not static, so this means that students are not always assigned to the same group. So we'll basically label this type of instruction as the how. Now, as we move to individualized instruction, we begin to focus on the learning needs of each individual student. The academic goals pretty much remain the same for the course. However, individual students may progress through the curriculum at different speeds based on their learning needs. The teacher will target one need at a time and skip over content that the student has already mastered. Instruction is calibrated to meet the pace of the student. This is key. You will see when we begin to explore these new math IISPs, how each plan is created to emphasize what is tested at each TABE level. So at TABE level E, TABE level M, D, and A. You will also see how the IISP allows you to incorporate individual student performance data from the student's TABE individual profile report. So this way you can specifically target standards and skills which that specific student has not yet mastered. As you review the IISP with the student, he will learn to focus on what he has not mastered yet, and he will skip over mastered content. We will label this type of instruction as the when. Now, finally, let me briefly address personalized learning. This term actually dates back to like the early 1960s or so. However, there really isn't any widespread agreement on a definition for the term. It has, however, become much more popular since the Rand Corporation, in partnership with famous Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right, began researching personalized learning and its impact on education. And what I want to bring across in this training, nonetheless, is that the IISPs can be used to personalize instruction for individual students should you choose to do so. And the easiest way to initiate this would be for you, the teacher, to select the learning activities based on your students' interests. Now, this type of instruction combines both the how and the when. and it adds student participation in the selection and creation of learning activities. And throughout this presentation, I want to emphasize and urge you, please, to keep foremost in your mind that one of the key goals for using an IISP is for the student to become a self-directed expert learner who monitors progress and reflects on learning based on mastery of content and skills, right? Wow, that's like a mouthful. Well, don't worry. Very simply put, we just want to move from a teacher-centric instructional environment where there is little student choice and voice to a more student-centric one where there is a lot more student choice and voice. But don't worry, you will soon see how this is encouraged as a standard application of the IISP. Now, in simple terms, we know what educators want is to identify successfully implement gap closing tools, etc., that lead to results. That's what we want. The tool we're addressing here is this new IISP for the TABE 11-12 math students, right? And we are finally at that point in the training where we are ready to unveil the tool that is definitely going to close the performance gap in your ABE math classrooms. And as we unveil the tool, we're going to address 4 basic steps. These steps will lead to the successful implementation of these plans in your ABE math class, right? And let's look at each one individually and see what they include. First, as with any test, it is crucial to know the structure of the test as well as what is tested. These new math IISPs were created to address both these topics. As we look at the plan and how it is structured, I will walk you through its different components and explain how they address each section of the test. At this time, I want to emphasize that because every IISP is unique to the subject and test level, you will observe as we continue this training that it is different from the previous reading and language trainings in that it specifically addresses the math test, how it is structured, the content that is covered at each of the TABE 11-12 math level tests, right? And this being said, we're going to move to step number 2. And here, each subject area test has 4 different test levels, right? We know this. For example, like the language subject area test, as well as the reading subject area test, the math one has 4 levels each, right? There's one E level, one M level, one D, and one A. So because all of them have the same format, right? It would not have sufficed to have just created one generic plan to address all the levels for each subject area. So what we did was we created a specific IISP for each test level, which totals for 4 IISPs for math, right? Just like we had 4 for reading and 4 for language. Again, in this training, we are just focusing on the math, all right? But the question is, out of these 4 IISPs, how do you know which one to use? How do you know on which test level each of your students will post-test? We're going to address this in detail in step 2. Step 3, an IISP doesn't really become individualized per se until it is tailored to fit a student's learning needs. It is essential that we learn to transfer student data onto the IISP in order to individualize it. In step 3, we will look at transferring student data from the TABE's individual profile report to the IISP in order to identify non-mastered math content for targeted instruction. And finally, at step 4, we began this training with 3 action words. Remember, differentiate, individualize, and personalize. Well, in step 4, I'm going to show you how you can use the data on the IISPs to address these 3 types of instruction. All right, let's keep moving. We begin with step 1, understanding the IISP and its components. Okay, if you want your students to do well on the TABE 11-12 math test, it's not enough to just provide good instruction. I already mentioned that you and your students have to know the test inside out. You need to know what topic areas are tested, how many questions under each area, what question types are included. You need to be able to connect classroom lessons and activities and tie them directly to tested content, right? These new math IISPs map out each level of the math test. So they help you and your students focus on math content that has not been mastered. And they also allow you to track progress over time to identify if and when a student has mastered a sufficient amount of tested content in order to be successful when actually post-testing. In part one of this training, I addressed how differentiated, individualized, and personalized instruction were all taken into consideration during the development of these math plans. Now, we've been emphasizing for some time now that these plans will take the guesswork out of teaching. And again, the question, why? Well, because they truly are individualized. We know that they're individualized because they do not emphasize content that was pre-tested. That's already gone. They're different from the student's individual profile report in that report only tells you how the student performed, right, on the math pretest. It doesn't tell you what math content is going to be post-tested. The IISPs actually identify the content which students must master at each test level to support success when post-testing. So let's talk about personalization for a moment. With these plans, students must own their learning because they know exactly how their post-test is structured, as well as the content that is tested. They can track their progress with guidance from their teachers. In this personalized type of instruction, students become experts who monitor progress, and then they reflect on learning based on mastery of tested content. So let's explore each of these math plan components in details. All right, let's look at each section of the plan. At the top, I know this looks daunting, but I promise you it is not. At the top, where you have section number 1 with the arrow pointing right, you have the name and level of the IISP. This IISP is the one for math for level M. But what does this mean exactly? The significance is that this plan corresponds to the student's post-test, again, not the student's pre-test. So for example, because this is a level M plan, this means that this particular student will be post-testing on a level M math test. Now, understanding this is critical because we are preparing students for their post-test. Let's look at an example. Let's say that you have a student who pre-tested on the math level E test. You know that the student will be post-testing on the level M test. So the student's individualized IISP should be the one for the level M test. If we look at section 2, which is located under the title of the IISP, you'll see that this is the section for you to just input basic student, teacher, and course information. Under that, you have section 3, current testing information on the left, and section 4, post-testing information on the right. Section 3, current testing information, refers to the student's pretest information. So here you will write the date that the student took the pretest, the level, the test form, and finally the corresponding NRS level. You input the information in this section based on the student's individualized profile report. But don't worry about that yet, because in the next section, I will show you specifically how to select the correct post-test form and level, along with how to transfer a student's pretest information to the IISP. But for now, let's just keep looking at the structure and content of the math IISP. Under section 4, post-testing information, you have the TABE level at which the student will be post-testing. You can also see the correlated college and career readiness level, C in this example, along with the grade level correlation for the level M math test. Now, this information is critical when selecting instructional resources and activities because you want to be sure to provide students with content that mirrors what they will encounter on their post-test, right? All right, section 5 identifies the domain followed by a % in parentheses. The percent indicates how much of the test addresses this particular domain. In this example, 15% of the test is dedicated to questions regarding number and operations in base 10. Right under the domain, you have the CCRS category or categories. This domain encompasses only one CCRS category, and it's the same name as the domain, number and operations in base 10. You will soon understand the significance of these categories when we look at the aligned CCR standards in the next couple of slides. Right under the category, you have the number of questions pertaining to this particular domain. Now, section number 6 is to the right of 5, and here in section 6, you can mark how well the student performed on his pretest on this particular section of the test. Okay, section number 7. All right, this is the table header that identifies the CCRS category, TABE category, and TABE skills. These are found on the student's individual profile report. The columns titled Emphasis and Aligned CCRS contain information from the TABE 11-12 blueprints, as well as the crosswalks for math. The emphasis can be labeled high, medium, or low. The aligned CCRS will give you a specific reference number to the correlated CCR standard so that you can obtain a more detailed description of the standard or substandard if you need one. And finally, the last title in the header reads Mastery Date. And here a teacher or a student can write the mastery date for each specific standard and substandard. Now, this column is a critical column because, folks, if it's updated in a timely manner, it will provide an easy at-a-glance view of content that has already been mastered. So in essence, it helps keep individual student data live. It's important to note, by the way, that sections 5 through 7 repeat in format for every single domain tested. So you might see a slight variation from one TABE level to the next. However, for the most part, you will notice that the information is standardized throughout all 4 levels. Now, before we move to step 2, let me just explain what the plus signs mean. As we've indicated in prior webinar trainings on the TABE 11-12 tests, we have identified some discrepancies between the blueprints, the CCR standards, the newly added TABE crosswalks, and the students' individual profile reports. Now, when you see a plus sign in front of the TABE skill, this means that the topic appears on the TABE blueprint for that subject area and test level, but it never appears on any of the students' individual profile reports for the same subject area and test level. It may also indicate that the skill appears perhaps on the crosswalks for math for that level, but is also excluded from the individual profile reports. So just to eliminate the possibility, even a mere possibility, of excluding content that is possibly tested, we've added that particular skill to the document. And we just wanted to put a plus sign so that you know that it's a different category. Now, you may also encounter a similar situation where you may see an A, and if you see that on the IISP, this means that this particular skill is found on the student's individual profile report, but it was never listed on the blueprints. So because it doesn't appear on the blueprint, this is probably why you do not have an emphasis attached to it. Finally, in section number 8, the last section of the plan, you'll be able to find that the section has a complete list of every aligned CCR standard on the plan, and that it's grouped by domain. Now, because the information is organized numerically, you as a teacher can easily locate the detailed explanation for any given CCR anchor, standard, or substandard listed under a particular domain. For example, if you're looking at evaluate perimeter and area in the TABE category on this example, on this slide, you can see that the aligned CCRS is 4.MD.3. So let's say you need to know what 4.MD.3 stands for. Well, you look under section 8 and scroll down until you locate the number. To the right, you will have a detailed description. Now, you can't see the explanation here because the document is cut off. However, we did add a box to include the full description, which is, apply the area and perimeter formulas for rectangles and real world and mathematical problems. For example, find the width of a rectangular room given the area of the flooring and the length by viewing the area formula such as a multiplication equation with an unknown factor. Wow, that's a mouthful, but you see how detailed the explanation is? You also have a checkbox in front of this substandard number, so you can check that off once the student masters this particular substandard. And I want to bring some emphasis to section 8. It's really useful to take the time to look at the provided examples that are included in many of the descriptions. These examples are usually real-life examples that any teacher, any of you can reproduce and apply in order to gauge mastery of a particular substandard. Now, as a disclaimer, I know that by now many of you are probably asking yourselves, why haven't you mentioned the new Florida best standards? And why haven't they been included as part of the alignment in this document? Well, in the months to come, we will be aligning the tested TABE categories, subcategories, and skills to the new Florida best standards. Now, once completed, you'll be provided with an addendum of these best alignments. This will help ensure that you do address these new required standards during instruction. However, do keep in mind that the TABE 11-12 tests were developed based on the CCR standards. This is the main reason why the primary alignment represented in these IISPs is directly tied to these CCR anchors and substandards. All right, let's move to step 2 to success. Okay, so in order to target student efficiencies in preparation for post-testing with the TABE 11-12, and it doesn't matter, reading, math, or language test, because it applies to all three, it is essential that the correct IISP be used in order to ensure that the tested content is addressed throughout instruction and is assessed for mastery. So the question is, all right, which IISP should I assign to a student? Now, selecting the right plan does not have to be complicated. So we're going to give it to you as easy as possible. The first thing you need to do is select the next test assignment, or NTA. This consists of 2 items. One is the form number, either 11 or 12, because this is TABE 11 or 12. The other is the next test level. And we already know that there are 4 test levels, E, M, D, or A. But, let's start with a form number. When determining the next form number, it's best to just keep it simple. If the student pre-tested on Form 11 of the TABE 11-12 test, then post-test the student on Form 12, and vice versa. Also, by selecting the alternate form, you will be able to post-test more frequently, thereby allowing you increased opportunities to move the student from one functional level to the next. Now, always please, by the way, be sure to follow the test publisher's recommended hours of instruction, okay? There's no getting around that. All right, now that you selected the alternate form, you need to select the level at which your students will post-test. Now, determining the next test level is critical. Folks, always try to post-test a student at the lowest level possible. This has 2 benefits. First, it ensures that you are addressing mastery of lower level content in order to avoid learning gaps. And second, it is easier for a student to make a functional level gain or to gain an literacy completion point, or LCP. Let's follow this chart. Based on a student's pre-test TABE level, which is the left column, as well as the NRS level, which is the middle column, you will prepare the student to post-test at the identified next test level, which is the right column. You don't need to look at the scale score range to determine the next test level. You just need to look at the student's NRS level. And in case you're wondering, this information comes from the student's individual profile report. Let's look at the example on this slide and go over the process of selecting this particular student's next test assignment. First, the student tested on Form 12. So we are going to assign her to Form 11 for the post-test. Second, the student pre-tested on the level M test for math. So look at number 1 above. And the student scored an NRS level 2. Look at number 2. You'll see that the student will need to post-test on the level M test in math. And that's number 3 on this chart. So in summary, this student's next test assignment, or NTA, for math is 11M. Not too bad, huh? Now, before moving on to step 3, let's clarify just one point. When a student has a plus or a minus sign by the scale score, you may have the option to retest the student at either a higher or lower level test. Now, before making the decision, consider making the decision that will allow the student to post-test at the lowest level possible. Remember, this gives you 2 benefits, okay? It ensures that you're addressing, lower level content in order to avoid learning gaps. And it also is easier for the student to show some growth and some performance gains. So this is more motivating for the student. Now, if you do want additional information on this, you can go to the tabetest.com website, and all of this is outlined in detail on this website. Now that the student's next form number, as well as the NTA, have been identified, the corresponding IISP can be created for the student. This will enable the teacher and the student to focus on instruction that addresses non-mastered content that will be post-tested. The IISP level should match the suggested NTA level. So let's get to step 3 and let's create this IISP. Now, based on the student's pretest score, we've already determined that the student will post-test on a Math Form 11 Level M test. So you need a blank copy of the ABE Mathematics TABE Level M Individualized Instructional Student Plan, right? You're also going to need a copy of the student's pretest. And by this, I mean the student's individual profile report. Now we type in the student's personal information at the top, and we transfer the current testing information from this individual profile report. Here we select M, we select 12, and NRS level 2. We now are ready to transfer the performance on the individual domains from the individual profile report to the corresponding section of the IISP. I want to clarify that sometimes there is an insufficient number of questions under a particular domain. And when this happens, you will not have the performance for that domain showing in the performance category section, okay? So don't freak out if it's not there. It's just that there's very few questions. Either that or they're just usually field test questions. Now let me bring something else to your attention. Remember that this student pretested on a level M test and will be post-testing on a level M test. This will make it very simple to transfer information from the student's individual profile report to the IISP. But what happens if the student were testing on a level D test? Well, there's really no data to transfer from a level M test because they're 2 different levels with different content. So in essence, you would need to cover most, if not all, of the content on the level D IISP during the trimester in your instruction. In this example, you can see how 3 of the results are transferred to the IISP. The number in operations / fractions, partial proficiency performance, found on the TABE report is transferred to the same section on the IISP for number in operations fractions. And you can see how the 2 additional results, number in operations in base 10 and operations in algebraic thinking, are transferred to the same 2 domains on the IISP. We made sure to keep the same verbiage so that there was no confusion. At the beginning of this training, I asked you to keep one thing foremost in your mind, and that's that one of the key goals for using the IISP is for the student to become a self-directed expert learner, one who is able to monitor progress and reflect on learning based on mastery of content and skills, right? So it's strongly recommended that you complete this next part of the plan or this next activity with the student so that you can encourage the student to monitor his own progress. Now, you may need to do this a couple of times until the student truly understands the process and is comfortable doing it on his own. But either way, nonetheless, you're still going to need to monitor student progress in order to determine when the student is ready to post-test. All right, let's continue transferring the student's pretest data to the IISP. You now look at each domain section. Take one at a time and reference back to the student's individual profile report. On this TABE report, you need to transfer the information from the demonstrated skills column to the IISP. Now, because these skills have already been mastered, you want to simply put a check mark in the mastery date column on the IISP. You don't need to put an actual date. Just continue to cross-reference until you have completed this for all the domains. And to make this process even simpler, just check off the skills under demonstrated skills column for all of it, all the way down. And then you know that whatever is left over under each domain is what has not yet been mastered, right? So that's what stays blank. Before moving to step 4, I'd like to further clarify 3 table titles found under the domains. I just want to be sure that you are clear as to where these titles and categories come from and how they can help you and your student better identify and understand the tested content. So first of all, just a brief reminder that the TABE 11-12 math test was developed to gauge mastery of CCR standards, right? So this being the case, it's essential for each level IISP, E, M, D, or A, to be aligned to the corresponding CCRS level. And this is why we did include the CCRS category on the IISP. Next, you have the TABE category. Now, the TABE category is taken from either the TABE blueprints found on the DRC website, right, under resources, or from the newly provided crosswalks, which are also found on the same website. Now, both have been cross-referenced with the TABE 11-12 individual profile report, just to ensure that no essential information was omitted in creating these plans, right? And while we conducted this analysis, we did find that some of the content that was identified as tested on the TABE 11-12 blueprint or the crosswalks, right, documents, did not appear on the actual student individual profile reports. And I've mentioned this before. Actually, we've mentioned this several times. So you will note that under the TABE skill column, you will see some TABE skills that appear with the plus sign. That means that, again, we have added them because they're on the blueprint or the crosswalk, but not on the individual profile report, all right? But the bottom line is that you don't need to stress about it. We know that there are discrepancies with the 3 documents, but you know, this is how we are addressing it. The point was that we did not want to leave any essential information out, okay? But back to the TABE category, you know, we have included it here in order to facilitate lesson planning, you know, especially in multi-level ABE classrooms, okay? And if you stay with us for the next webinar that we have regarding TABE, which is, I believe it's November 4th, then rest assured we will be addressing these multi-level classrooms. Now, please be assured that if the TABE skills listed on the IISPs, you are strongly encouraged to emphasize it during instruction. Let me clarify one more thing before moving to step 4, okay? Let's look at this note in red on the SNP on this slide. It reads, this domain has no questions represented on the math TABE level M test. However, it's been included since it's identified as a tested domain in the TABE blueprints, all right? This is similar to what I just mentioned, okay? It means that either there's too few questions on this section or the questions are field test questions. But we did want you to know this so there are no surprises for the test. All right, so now you are ready for step 4 of the process, using the IISP to differentiate, individualize, and personalize. Okay, so now that the student's IISP is complete, you have a document that takes all of the guesswork out of instruction, folks. With the IISP, now you and your student know exactly what standards, substandards, and skills need to be emphasized and which maybe perhaps just need a light review or can be skipped altogether. In step 4, I want to address how you can use the IISP to differentiate, individualize, and personalize. Now, keep in mind, however, that this part of the process requires practice and experience. So this means that the more you use the IISP to develop lessons and activities and to drive instruction, the more proficient you will become at it. Also remember that every time a standard or substandard or skill has been mastered, it is so critical, so essential that the mastery date be documented on the student's IISP. Remember, this is what keeps your data live. This is what is going to tell you when your student is ready for post-testing. And then as a student, as you and the student monitor the student's progress, you know, he is going to become more self-directed in his learning, and you'll start seeing that he will begin to seek out activities that address or specifically address non-mastered content and skills. Now, to address differentiated instruction, be sure that you group students into small groups based on commonly failed content, okay? These groups should be flexible. What does this mean? This means that students should not remain in the same group throughout the length of the entire course. If a student has already mastered the content that you are teaching, well, just put the student in, give them an alternate activity, put them in an alternate group that addresses other content the student has not mastered. To individualize your instruction, work one-on-one with the student. Target one failed standard or substandard or even TABE skill at a time. Assign activities only for non-mastered content. Pace the activities to fit your student's learning style. And finally, test the student as soon as he has demonstrated mastery of the tested content. Don't just wait till the end of the trimester to test all your students. And finally, to personalize instruction, select or customize activities that are of interest to the student. Now, the ultimate goal here is for the student to eventually be able to select his own activities based on non-mastered content, right? So you will need to provide guidance though at first, just to ensure that the student makes appropriate selections based on needs, skills, and interests, not just interests. And then gradually you release the student as he demonstrates accuracy in making the appropriate selections on his own. Now, as educators, we know that learning must be reinforced. We can't just watch this, webinar training and, poof, we have automatically processed all of the information and internalized it in the way that it was presented, right? Many of you are going to have questions after this training. You are going to have questions about the test, questions about the IISPs, and maybe even questions regarding how to align resources to the IISPs. At IP Day, we always try to anticipate your needs, just like you try to always anticipate your students' learning needs. So that being said, we have created a new TABE Assistance Center. And this Assistance Center can be accessed directly from our IP Day website. I'm sure that many of you have already accessed and are excited about it. You've asked a lot of questions. We've provided answers because we made this available after we did the reading and the language IISP webinar trainings. Now, I just kind of want to take a minute to highlight the 3 main sections of the IP Day TABE Assistance Center for those of you who have not had the opportunity to explore it. If you look at number 1, you see an FAQ section. So here we will post the most common questions and answers about TABE 11-12. Look at number 2. And this is where you can access and download the IISPs. You are now able to download the language, the reading, and the math IISPs. And these downloadable templates, you have one for each TABE math level test, one for each TABE reading level test, and one for each TABE language level test, right? They're all fillable PDFs. So this means that you have the option to print them, right? Or you can just save them digitally, right? It's your choice. Now, I personally recommend you keep an updated digital copy that you can easily email to your students as an attachment. It's just the easiest way to do it, and that way you don't kill so many trees. Number 3 highlights the third component for the TABE Assistance Center, which is the Ask a TABE Advisor. You know, I love this part, honestly, because it allows you to ask a TABE-related question, right? And receive authentic responses. And the word is authentic, right? From one of our TABE advisors within 72 hours. This is not you ask another teacher who gives you the wrong information. You know, ask us. We don't do this for free. Ask us. Questions can be general questions about the test, right? Questions about obtaining TABE certification for our state, Florida, and questions specific to the new TABE Individualized Instructional Student Plans. So any of these TABE-related questions, we're here for you. Okay, so we're at the last part of our training, but I first want to summarize just a few key points. Okay, now you have the tool that you need to take the guesswork out of teaching and to engage each student in taking an active part in his learning, right? In your math classes. Together, you can both use these IISPs to target specific learning needs. You can also use them to hold individual data chats with your students. So go over what they've mastered and what's pending. Have discussions about what activities they prefer and which ones are of greater interest to them. As you personalize activities more and more, you'll see how your students become more engaged and empowered in their learning. You know, and finally, you're just going to sit back and watch your data move in the right direction. Finally, I want to emphasize that all of the student pretest data that you will learn to transfer, or that you did learn to transfer, hopefully, comes from the TABE 1112 individual profile report. This is the test report. So there's no guessing involved. And remember that once you've completed this training and you begin to implement these IISPs in your ABE math classes, you are going to immediately begin to see your students progress more quickly through the course and make functional level gains, okay, which will move your data in the right direction. Remember, all the plans are available in fillable PDF. All you got to do is, you know, open them, download them, open them, update them, you know, save them again, attach them every time you want to provide your students with an updated version. So please take the guesswork out of teaching and learning. You know, just together, you and your students can both use these IISPs to target specific learning gaps and needs, okay? And don't forget to engage your students in taking an active part in his or her learning. Use these IISPs in the data chats. Use them to review what they've mastered and what's still pending. Have discussions about the types of activities that they prefer and are of greater interest to them. And remember that the more you personalize these activities, the more you're going to engage them and empower them in their learning. Now, as always, I like to end my trainings by emphasizing a growth mindset. So I ask you to take what you have learned in this training one step further. Change how you look at instruction. Look beyond your class as a whole. When differentiating instruction, be sure that you group students based on non-mastered content. Then, you know, take it further and begin to look at each individual student so that you can address the specific needs of each one. Redesign your curriculum. Develop lessons and select instructional resources based on commonly failed content. Emphasize activities that support tested math content. Make an active decision to drive targeted instruction based on the IISP and use the plan to motivate your students to become actively engaged in their own learning. Pace these activities and schedule post-testing based on each student's individual progress. Next, review all of the information covered in this webinar and look through the companion resource handbook. This resource handbook is so critical. It details everything and provides additional resources. And share this information with teachers, with administrators, and district personnel, and just become an expert at it. And reflect and make a change. Finally, Ask yourself, hey, what is working especially well in my ABE math class? And what is not working? Hold regular data chats, update your IISPs every time content is mastered. Work with your testing department so that you test students as soon as they're ready, right? Share your students' success with other teachers so that they too are motivated to implement changes that are going to drive up all student performance data for your school site. And it looks like our time is up, huh? I urge you guys to please access the IPDAY website for ongoing professional development and to access the instructional resources. And please, please take some time to go over the resource handbook for this webinar. I thank you for spending time with me today, and I want you to stay connected with all of us. Your feedback does matter to us, so I'm going to send this back to June so she could take over and go over the feedback portion of this. I welcome your feedback. That way we can keep improving our trainings and give you what you need. June, back to you.
Maria, thank you so much. Now you'll see 3 short questions that will appear on your screen. If you don't mind, we love to hear back from you and see how you liked the webinar, what you felt about the webinar. There's just 3 short questions there that if you could just take an opportunity to answer, we would be grateful for it. While you do that, I just want to remind you of next Wednesday's webinar, Talk Data to Me. It's about processes, procedures, and people. So we hope that you can join this discussion on ways to improve your adult education programs performance, student outcomes. And we're going to be really analyzing, again, processes, procedures, and people. So with that, I wish you a great rest of your day. Please be safe, and thank you for all of your support.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.